Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce Raghavendra, known as Raghu. Raghavendra comes with over 3 decades of experience in HR in a gamut of sub-functions. He was a senior vice president of HR in Infosys BPM. Now, what is he known for? He's known for his abilities in aligning the HR functional role to the dovetailed business plans and developing HR competencies. He has anchored numerous initiatives in developing strategies in HR. Importantly, he has created strong synergies between the performance management process and employee development platforms. And a very, very critical aspect for the workforce management professionals, he has ensured that the internal talent pool of Infosys are made readily available to meet the business demands and challenges. He has managed cultural diversity and change management, which are his specialities. This is a very small introduction to Raghu. I hope I've made justice in the available time. Raghu, over to you.
Thank you, Srividya, and good afternoon to all of you. I know this is either lunch hour or the session just post-lunch, and this GWFM ensures that my sessions are always immediately after lunch. It's it's a double-edged sword, because on one end we can have people who say, okay, let's take it easy, and on the other, probably to say that challenges me in terms of can I keep the audience engaged? Even in the to the year last year, to the date, I was asked to speak on a similar subject, and I think the need now is to move ahead to the next stage in terms of what is it, and therefore I titled this program as "To Gig or Not to Gig." If you look at slide 2, it is the quintessential question which Hamlet had to face, where in his speech he contemplates death and suicide, bemoaning the pain and unfairness of life, but acknowledging that the alternative might be even worse. But here, I think, in today's context, especially with the twin challenge, one, because of the huge technological advances, and two, in terms of the pandemic, I think this quintessential question becomes all the more important, and that's what slide 3 talks about. Ultimately, I think our focus is to ensure that we need to adjust to the way the environment is, the business environment is, and look at how we actually focus in terms of adapting and be more prepared in terms of meeting the challenges of what needs to be done. And the question is not as whether or if we will do this, but the focus and the objective is how do we take it forward. And therefore, if you look at slide 4, it's very clear that in the gig economy, the focus is increasingly looking at temporary, flexible jobs, which is actually, in my view, becoming more and more of a way of life. It's more commonplace. And organizations too find it extremely advantageous to hire independent contractors, freelancers, instead of actually burdening their books with full-time employees. Therefore, in my understanding, a gig economy undermines the traditional economy of full-time workers, and where the focus would be in terms of career development. But here in the gig economy, the focus is in terms of experiencing something new, something which they want to be interested in, and from an organization context in terms of how to keep the costs in check while meeting business requirement. Because ultimately, in my understanding, in the gig economy, which is still emerging, evolving, regulations would need to catch up. because for all people who are on this call or the workforce managers, ultimately for us to employ the contingent workforce, the need is to see that we are on the right side of law, because increasingly what SHM says is that there are more than or close to 130 million workers in some form, where the workforce could be temporary, could be, you can call it gig, can call it on contract, and increasingly this flexi workforce will continue to actually actually balloon, if I may say so, because the challenge is, I think, or the excitement is that the gig economy will go to $455 billion as per SHM in the year 2024, and the pandemic is actually helping, and this number can only go up. So the question the gig economy faces is not whether the gig economy will grow, but by how much will it grow. Globally too, if I'm looking at America, that's what the Forbes, I think June 2020 article talks about. 36% of Americans actually indulge in some form of gig work or the other. And more than two-thirds of companies today in the developed world, more so in America, is looking at how to bring in those scarce skills, because the war for talent is going to hot up. And more importantly, the new workforce, the millennial generation, will look for variety. And therefore, this is one area, especially in a developing economy like India, it becomes that much more critical that we need to be more than ready, future-proof our entire business plans to ensure talent is available, so that whether it's a large-scale organization or medium or small, war for talent will heat up, and therefore organizations need to be ready in terms of how or what is it that needs to be done to ensure that we are prepared to meet this challenge. Because increasingly, as we start to explore the gig economy, the growth, the change, the pandemic, all of it will play a significant role. And normally there is a life cycle and time frame for any new way of work to take roots, stabilize, and then move ahead. But I think we need to fast forward the entire process to be ready in terms of what and how we need to be prepared for this challenge that is coming, because it will be exciting. And that's what I focused on slide 5, because the shift in perspectives, in realities, in priorities of both the organization, the industry, and the employee needs to make a mind shift change. It needs to leapfrog to the next phase. Because in my view, organizations that understand the need of this particular way of looking at business to meeting customer requirements is important. And it will be those organizations that will have an edge, which will also, or more importantly, focus on the gig worker, and they will have the edge. It's just not looking at what the customer wants or what the business needs to meet its business commitments to its shareholders, but how or what will be the employee experience. They will have an edge. And organizations which adapt very quickly, it will gain by a mile in this new environment. Because in a global environment, especially large organizations, where to set up a system, a process, and for it to be implemented, it will have its own time frame. But the need is to be agile, flexibility of mind and matter, and ability to operate in an ambiguous environment with what will make a huge difference and determine outcomes. And in all of this, what should be not forgotten is the digital reality. So increasingly, organizations need to look at what is it they're doing in terms of actually developing the infrastructure, in terms of the technological infrastructure at one end, mindsets, customer needs, and what the gig worker would look forward to. Because increasingly, the focus is not what the organization needs to do. The mindset should be is what is it the business and more importantly the employee would want to do. And if we tackle that mindset, then I think we are in the right direction. Everything and everyone should aim at wanting employees to be with the organization rather than organization feeling the need that we need to have them. So I think it's a very fine distinction. It's where you want to give the emphasis. And that's why slide 6 talks about any place, anywhere, anyone, anytime, anyhow. I think that's where I think the focus is. From large computers to laptops to tablets to the mobile, I think we've gone through all of this. I don't have to highlight this. I'm sure this is beaten to death. But that's one reality we should be aware and conscious of and fine-tune or revamp, whichever way one needs to look at in terms of how the focus on change needs to be provided for. Because it's just not in terms of the equipment, but it's the infrastructure where it can be and where it will be, not can be. Location agnostic, ergonomics will play a role even at home. Currently, I'm operating from home. I have a house full of people. I've had now my parents also shifting in here. So I've been ousted from my place. So I'm balancing my laptop as I speak. So I think while it's a one-off, but increasingly this will become the norm. And in terms of your technology, your neural networks, and demographics, I think all will play a role. When we are, as an organization, as managers, as leaders, intuitive to their needs, employees or the gig worker will want us to be with us for a very long time. Because loyalty in times like this is gold, especially for the gig worker who is being hired based on a project or a gap in technological skills or a specialist domain he or she works with. So therefore, I think this becomes a critical role. And the challenge is in the slide 7, I talk of the 4C conundrum. As a business, as customers, as employees, what is it or how is it we should look at in terms of bringing in to avoid the confusions or the challenges where from a customer context, they will expect that we deliver whatever is expected and maintain all confidentiality. From a business context, the need is to ensure there's continuity in service. And more importantly, that we are compliant. Because today, whether in the developed world or in emerging economies like India, the law is still very nebulous, leading to a number of interpretations. So how or what is it we should do and be conscious of? So for people, for organizations, which is looking at increasingly being pulled into the vortex of the new normal, hybrid workforce, gig and contingent workforce come into play. I think these are areas which need to be built in. And to tackle mindsets and have to have the share of heart, if I may say so, I'm using it interchangeably. How do we build in that culture which is open, agile, and willing to accept that the holy cows of yesterday probably may not hold good in the new gig economy. And therefore, a very brief context of what the contingent workforce is in slide number 8, because we understand that all of this, whether it's a temp worker, the consultant, taskers, project-based work, all of them exist. But if you look at in terms of how it's evolving, I think there's a greater understanding, a shape in terms of what and who it is. Ultimately, it cannot be, in my view, it cannot be seen in isolation. It's a combination of all these factors, and how it can work for our organization is what makes the difference. And therefore, slide 9 talks a bit more on this, because the need is to have a robust mechanism to manage with this contingent workforce for the company from outside its walls. Especially in today's world, it becomes so much more of a reality. I'm sure that you can have them inside your offices, but then I think that it could get into contract work, or it could be a consultant who comes into work. Here, probably because of the force or the way businesses are being run today, the place of work actually becomes agnostic. And that's what gig is all about. So they're high per project basis. They may continue or may not continue after a project, and they may work on site or remote. All of this will come into play. So when you look at slide 10, if I may say so, it is ultimately the hybrid model which comes into play. And I have given it a small name called the New Age Hybrid Model. In the past, we had distinct roles. We had clear-cut boundaries of who, what, where, and how how organizations would run their businesses. There were two distinct circles, but today the intersection is actually going up, increasing by leaps and bounds, and therefore the focus is the traditional setup will start changing, evolving into this setup where time, effort, skill sets, location, all become very, very important for it to make. The balance of work in terms of who is a gig worker, who's a permanent employee, what are traditional roles. If you look at what's on the right-hand side, we've mentioned legal. A lot of us we would outsource statutory positions and get people to consult. But if you look at the latest Government of India regulations, where they say the compliance officer has to be in the roles of the organization, directly affiliated to head office. So if you look at it from that context very clearly, some of the roles are getting clearly defined, but increasingly they will start merging, and the point of intersection, the NAM factor, if I call it, is where it will come to play. In my understanding, slide level are the 6 areas one would need to focus, and I will touch upon each one of them. For us, for me, in my understanding, today more than ever in the past, where business and technological disruption has been so high, there is definitely, while I mentioned it as there's a fork in the road, actually there are multiple routes business are taking. And the idea is, how is it we're going to handle it? Because as we iterate the business model in the 21st century, primarily, if you are aware or notice, that the first biggest disruptor was technology. And without internet, without digitalization, companies would struggle to find or be able to run their businesses. And it would be impossible to connect or communicate with offsite workers. And because of widespread automation and digitization, the tasks or the work companies will delegate is not to whom, but how soon your gig worker will be able to complete the work in the manner that is expected. And therefore, it becomes critical whether companies use automation in support of workers or workers in support of automation. So one of the key factors that will make a huge difference, is so critical, is technology, automation, digitization. A couple of examples which I thought I could share, which comes very easily while I've been talking about this is very niche, technology driven, domain rich in terms of how gig will increasingly be associated with. But I think there is a gray area. Uber is a fantastic example where it now talks of replacing its drivers with self-driving cars. But it's a platform. It's a good beginning to look at how or where gig will impact people. It's not just in a service organization. It's also a company called Nu Skin. I think they're into beauty and health products. What their president says that he tells that we believe the gig economy should generate new opportunities for people and not take them away. So even companies which are into hardcore products are looking at leveraging technology and see where they can actually, based on season, peak requirements, or specialist activities, be assigned to the gig worker, because it is a multi-level marketing company finally, and that sells personal care products. So it is not just limited to a service organization. It can, in my view, evolve to any type of business activity. And in slide 12, I talk about it today, the contingent workforce, or the way of looking at using different types of talent to ensure your businesses meet its commitments to its stakeholders. I call it the high stakes game. When I ask you, or when it's generally believed that easiest thing to remember for a gig worker is the Uber drivers and freelance writers. And basically, it was assumed that generally repeatable tasks which can be done outside of the boundary of a company is for gig. But now, with the work from home becoming a reality, even complex operations, high skill, managerial roles also can easily be outsourced. So if leaders today are wanting to switch or looking at variety in terms of what it would mean, then I think it will not just stop at a level. Increasingly, the gig worker or the gig workforce is moving up the value chain, right up to directors and the boards who can actually do that. It exists in some form or the other, but it'll get a lot more formal. When we talk of, in slide 13, in the past, people were very hesitant to say they're working on contract, they're working on temp basis. But today, I think they've got a great way of saying that I'm working as part-time in a particular organization and living my dream, working on multiple projects. And probably they will wear it as a badge of honor in terms of saying and working for company A, B, C, D. And that's why when I said the 4 C's, they need to build policies for ensuring confidentiality, for getting that individual into the culture of the organization becomes critical. As gig becomes a way of life, stigmas of saying partially employed, unemployed, working on contract, or as a consultant, I think will be actually a badge of honor in terms of experience a person has. And therefore, when I talk of slide 14, it talks about how from being seen as utopian, what is the feasibility? What is it in terms of sustainability? How and what is it organizations need to be doing? Because the lockdown, the COVID-induced lockdown has displaced many reservations that this will become the way of life. And to that extent, e-commerce will gain a lot of prominence. And therefore, FTE to FTR to consultant to contractor to gig worker to specialist domain-led work becomes a way of life. And when I talk of from desirability to viability to feasibility, I think the focus is on emerging labor regulations. Because whether it is in the US or in developing countries like India, most of the laws and regulations focused on a full-time employee and probably contract employees. But increasingly, the focus today is to look at, even in the government of India is talking about social security benefits for people. And today, when I just finished 60 years and I'm superannuated from Infosys after being there with them for 12 years. And when we said that we will go the whole hog in terms of gig working, we realized in certain states of India, irrespective of the number of hours a person is putting in, the law is not clear, or the law as understood very clearly said, minimum wages need to be paid. So if people believe that they need to be paid by the hour, then I think it is not correct in terms of a strict interpretation of the rule, which says that irrespective of the number of hours a person is employed for, he or she would need to be paid minimum wages. And therefore, there is a lot of confusion, there's a lot of issues which are arising while business is demanding greater clarity. I think workforce managers, comp and ben experts, people in the legal team, I think need to put their heads together in terms of for this to become a way of life, what is it we are doing? Because even Nirmala Sitharaman in this year's budget very clearly said that she's proposing that the gig workers should come under the ambit of the ESIC. Women working is allowed only with certain organizations with specific permissions. How is it if organizations, industry want to actually leverage gig working irrespective of gender, location, state, whatever? I think this is one area which becomes critical. And therefore, while law is at one aspect, I think slide 15 talks about the holy cows we in HR are so close, saying precedence, practice, procedure, policy. I think all of them need to be put in cold storage. I'm not saying it's not important, it's good for a context, but I think we need to have a pure white canvas in terms of how or what is it we should be doing. Because we are so conditioned. Is there a precedence? What's the practice? What is the process been? And does policy allow it? I think these are questions which was good when a business was stable, when you had clear aspects which were making businesses run. But in the changed environment, it becomes that much more critical for us as HR professionals to look at this factor. If not, with the new workforce that is coming into play, especially the gig worker, who generally is tech savvy, probably a lot more entrepreneurial, a lot more adventurous, and a lot more daring. For all you know, this industry, IT, ITS, a lot of service industries were not unionized. Probably a lot of trade bodies or employee bodies can come together and create a potent force, because the power of digital, the power of internet is very strong. And if we don't extend benefits, then the workman or the gig workman who's so tech savvy, who's so clued on into as far as social is concerned, if you don't take care of that aspect, then you will have a challenge getting people to your organization. And that's why in slide 16, I talk of what is the ecosystem we need to develop to sustain the gig economy. In its very amorphous stage, accountants whom we use at the time of filing our returns, or advertising agencies which we use to come up with a plan, are things which are already existing, but they will get a lot more shape. They will get a lot more structure as we move ahead. And when we are talking of committed individuals, not an organization, individuals, because many people would not like to work for an agency. He or she is an agency by himself. He or she has an entrepreneurial mindset. So what is it we are going to do, especially where B2B, where digital marketing, e-commerce, and using social comes into play? What are the changes that we need to be bringing in is what we should focus. Because this is one, as I said in the beginning, what Asuchan said, there are billions of dollars which will now come into the economy in the new ways of running the business. It's exciting times, and the gig economy will play a significant role. In fact, the budget also proposes, this year's budget also proposes to launch a portal. I'm not too sure if they've launched a portal that would collect relevant information on gig workers, what's the type of work that is happening, including blue-collar workmen, and what are the relevant policies, benefits that come into play. And these are things in the Code of Social Security of 2020 will further be upgraded to bring in a form of a framework which will support business, which will support industry, which will support the employee. And to this extent, I believe that we are moving in the right direction. The need to retain interest, social obligations, because generally, industry focuses on what is required for them to be sustainable. And in an economy where in the past jobs were too few and too many people to chasing those jobs, to a situation where you require specialists to run your operations. So that's the mindset change that's happening as we see. And therefore, slide 17 talks about what is the way to do. To gig or not to gig are things which we need to look at. The economy today is booming. The idea is that are we focused in making things happen? And therefore, as HR professionals, as work managers, are we doing enough? And therefore, in slide 18, I say that we need to take the leap of faith, start preparing, if not already started, and look at all these aspects. This is, in my last year's talk, I focused a lot more on the fundamentals of defining gig and all of that. I thought today, I'm sure there are enough and more conferences and seminars that have happened. I thought we need to look into the future, and that's what the new age hybrid model is all about, where the borders will be completely blurred, and the new age hybrid model is what will make a difference. As Colin Powell talks in the next slide, that ultimately for us as organizations, as leaders, as HR or workforce managers, I think there's a lot of hard work. They need to be imaginative, have an open mind, innovate, and it's better to fail early than not to try at all. This is what I would say in conclusion. Thank you for your patience. I hope I was able to provide some insights. The house is open for questions at this time.
Thanks, Raghu. I think this is very depth of understanding of gig and not gig, and I myself have really learned a lot, and I'm sure that this is insightful to others. Let me see if there are any questions. There's one question, Raghu, where organizations not agreed to hire any gig so far. They've been in used to the subcontractors, freshers, and FTE model. Management doesn't believe, and client is also not accepting gig talent for the IT organizations, for example. How do they really get to the gig talent portion to observe or take this as a kind of skill where I mean this is as good as FTE or as good as subcontractor or as good as any other resources where like this can give them what is in it for them to take gig, and now how HR or maybe the WFM heads or managers could sell this model to the management or to the client. That's one question.
Thanks for the question. And if you recollect, we had this conversation a few days back too, where some of the large organizations are hesitating to actually change their context in terms of hiring a gig worker. But I think, in my view, it should not be looked in isolation, gig as a concept. It's the contingent workforce which comes into play. And gig is one aspect which will evolve as time moves ahead. Even in specific organizations which are using temp or contract workers, they're going through an agency. But increasingly, the rate of pace of change of technology and requirements is so high that organizations, if saying that we will not go through the gig route, will end up losing out on precious talent. The focus is that they need to start looking at this as one more component in meeting their business requirements and a part of the contingent workforce. Unless they pilot it, it will not happen. I can talk of my own experience during the pandemic. It was for the internal communications team, where we had two casualties in terms of attrition, nothing else, because of family considerations, and one because someone got a better offer. And there are enough, while we believed at that point of time, they had put a freeze on total hiring into the roles of the organization. And when we spoke to a couple of agencies, they charged 5-star rates to depute someone to make it work for us. And what we did was, through connects, looking and asked my recruitment team to scan actually profiles in the net and see who is available and who's not looking for a full-time assignment, but looking at project-based focus. And we tried it out and it worked out beautifully for us. And that person too is happy. And the challenge or the excitement was to make that person understand what the requirement is, what's the culture of the organization, what are the boundaries, what are the ironclad requirements that are there, so that all the 4 C's are taken care of, while we got those two people onto the organization's roles, if I may say so, technically not on the roles, but as a gig workman to make it work for us. So it worked for us beautifully. Or the larger organization, which has its own, the parent organization is about 2.5 lakh people. And it takes time for mindsets to change, to get the entire operations to also plan for having the gig workman. But in that time space, we had a lot of people who are actually not fully occupied in that stage. So we did an internal gig campaign where we trained people in certain skill sets. You can call it by any name, but we call it the internal gig, the internal talent marketplace. And believe me, there was so much excitement. There were so many challenges. Bosses didn't want to let go of their people. The employees thought that there's a great, they don't want to leave their bosses because they have their own set of communities within their own teams. But they said they get something new to learn, new to operate, a new technology to work on, and a new project. So I think it's an evolutionary process. But if organizations say that I don't want to do gig, then they will be left behind in the war for talent, is how I would respond to you. Hope I answered your question.
Absolutely. Thanks, Raghu. There's another question from Chaitra Ranjan. It is said culture eats strategy for breakfast. How can we imbibe organization culture in gig employees? Will they be loyal to the organization vision?
Great question. I think it is not just for the gig workmen. It is, Chaitra, it's for your regular employees too. Today, in the BPM world, we had 45,000 employees. And we have, for the last 15 months when I was in the organization, we had lockdowns. We had nobody coming into offices. But the work stopped non-stop. The work did not stop even for a minute, even for a day. And we had attrition, we had new clients that were won, and we had to hire people. And we had to hire tons of people, thousands of people, hundreds of people. And our challenge to even get them. And very clearly, because of lockdowns, the government said nobody can come to work to office. And I think what was required is whether it's a gig workman or in today's context where the work is virtual, how or what is it you should be doing differently is what counts. What we did was we brought in all the stakeholders, people who had just joined the organization, team leaders who will be their bosses, recruiters, HR managers, induction spokes. For 2 days, we got them virtually into a room and looked at each one of these aspects in terms of how will you build that connect? How will you build that touch in terms of people wanting to actually associate themselves with the organization? Our next topic is also on managing virtual teams. We'll talk a lot about these factors too. So it is not specific, Chaitra, for a gig workman in today's context, where 100% of work is happening in a number of organizations virtually. Right from sourcing to hiring to onboarding to inducting to being billed or the person doing their work, everything is virtual. So the same fundamentals will also apply to the gig workman, is how I would respond to Chaitra. Thank you. Great question.
Thanks, Raghu. I think it's a very appropriate answer to the question from Chaitra Ranjan.